This is a once in a 50-year opportunity. What Israel needs to do immediately, we need to take out Iran's nuclear program. We need to attack Iran's energy facilities, and we need to attack the regime itself right away, because Iran made a fatal mistake of shooting 200 ballistic missiles at the state of Israel. Enough is enough, people.
Well, I just want to be precise, Prime Minister. You want Israeli airstrikes to blow up Iran's nuclear facilities and its energy facilities, all the oil wells and the oil-related industry that is the main part of the Iranian economy.
That's correct.
Wow. No shame or embarrassment or blushing involved here. So do you think that that's the next thing on the Israeli target list that would come potentially even as early as tonight in Israel?
Yes. And he's not saying anything that has not been said before. The Israelis have made it clear that if they were attacked in any way by Iran, that the first thing on their agenda was to destroy the oil production facilities. So they will be attacked. Now, that's very important. Let's step away from the nuclear facility issue right now. That's very important because it has a huge impact in Northeast Asia. And the Chinese in particular are very concerned about that. And they have made it clear that they will stand by Iran in the event that this occurs. There are forces in Iran who've said, if the Israelis do this, we will not hesitate to destroy all the oil facilities or production facilities that remain in the region. In other words, they're turning now on the Emirates and Saudi Arabia in particular. What they would say in the Muslim world is the fat and the corrupt in far-off places who are wealthy. They are going to pay a price for their failure to join in the fight against Israel. So this is a very dangerous path that they're on, but it's going to bring on the regional war in a very dramatic fashion. The second thing is this idea of regime destruction or decapitation. They can try that. That's been tried many, many times before. It's not going to work for the same reason that Nasrallah's assassination or Soleimani's assassination had no real demonstrative strategic impact. When you kill someone at the top or someone in any structure that is organized militarily or hierarchically, what do? You replace that individual with someone else. And in many cases, the individuals that show up next are frequently more radicalized and committed to the fight than the people that they're replacing. So that's a dangerous approach. It flies in the face of reason, because historically, if you go to war, you try to go to war with the idea of ending the war as soon as possible and finding partners on the other side who recognize the wisdom of doing so as well. That is out of the question for the Israelis. They're taking a very Stalinist or Hitlerian approach. It's either everyone who opposes me is destroyed or annihilated, or it's unacceptable. In other words, it's a scorched earth approach that means that the end state is a world, as far as they are concerned, devoid of any enemies, and they are supremely powerful and in charge. That's it. And then finally, the nuclear facility issue. I'm sure that we have given them munitions that will allow them to penetrate. How far, how effectively, I have no idea. And they have redundant facilities. Not everything is necessarily concentrated in one location. So we'll have to see. But the real signal that all of this sends is you in Iran, you in every Muslim country, you in Turkey, you in China. And by the way, you Russians who are backing up the Iranians, you'd better figure out quickly that we're deadly serious. And if you get in our way, you're going to be victims too. I think it's a terrible way to do business, because it's this sort of thing that says you're either with us or against us. When you take that position, inevitably, everybody ends up against you.
Now, I want to go down the task or the list here of those objectives and those things that they want to accomplish. And I'm going to ask you, do you think that they can physically do them in several different areas?
And they've only recently just crossed the border into Lebanon. And we heard that supposedly Israeli special operations forces were preceding the advancing troops in order to, quote unquote, clear the way so that this massive armored force and artillery force could be effective. Now, it's obviously not working out that way, but we don't know the details. Secondly, an Israeli soldier on the front in Lebanon was just interviewed on Israeli television within the last few hours. And one of his comments really stood out. He said, I don't understand why people here continue to refer to this operation in Lebanon as limited. He said, I've never seen so much equipment, so many stores, so much ammunition, so many fighting platforms. I've never seen anything in my life like this. It's overwhelming. I think he's telling us the truth. For the Israelis to go against Hezbollah, they always understood that if you go in there, you have to annihilate everybody that you come into contact with. In other words, it's a no quarter asked, no quarter given. Scorched earth operation, destroy everything. Because if you don't, it will be back. And they know that. Every time they've gone in and they have failed in that to achieve that objective, the enemy has grown stronger. So I think they've decided to take the gloves off. And the point is this: if you're sitting in Tehran, if you're sitting in Beirut, if you're sitting in Amman, in Cairo, anywhere else in the Muslim world, and you're looking at this, or Damascus, you need to understand something. This is real. This is exactly what Naftali said. They called it a once in a 50-year opportunity. I think it may turn out to be a once in the lifetime of Israel opportunity. The question is, how does that turn out? Does Israel emerge from this with the victory they want, which is the complete annihilation of all their enemies, or do they not emerge at all?
Do they have the force structure to even accomplish this objective?
Well, two things. First, we are pouring enormous amounts of cash and resources into Israel in order to keep Israel's economy from completely collapsing. So without us, none of this can happen, simply because it's not a question of not having the manpower. They are literally harvesting most of the manpower right now, and they can't keep their economy running under these circumstances without us. Secondly, they seem to have added some new formations. Now, Americans need to understand that what we call a battalion, which may be 500 to 800 to 1,000 men, depending upon the mission profile, a battalion in the Israeli setting is a brigade. And a brigade in the Israeli setting is not a brigade as we understand it. In other words, a battalion looks like a reinforced company. A brigade looks like a reinforced battalion. And a division is really a brigade-size organization of about 5,000. So we toss these terms around, and Americans think, oh, man, that's 15, 20,000 troops in a division. No, it isn't. And the Israelis have organized this way so that they have a large leader-to-lead ratio. And the reason for that is very obvious. Most of these people are just citizens. They're citizens who have been put into uniform periodically, trained, and then go home as reservists, or the way our National Guards do. These people have taken a beating in Gaza. They're taking a beating now as they go into Lebanon, because they are not highly trained professional combat troops. They're going to do the best they can, but that's why Israeli air power is so important. That's why during the strike last night, the Iranians made a point of using their hypersonic missiles against those locations where Israeli air power is concentrated. Now, we don't know what the battle damage assessment was, and I don't think we'll know for a long time. And you know from your own experience in war, as I do, that BDA is always very misleading. Yeah. Last night we did this, or the 2 days this happened. It usually doesn't turn out to be accurate, and it's very misleading, and it creates a false impression of success. We saw that in the Gulf, right, and that was true during World War II. We're going to see it again here. And I think that's what's happening already as they move into Lebanon. It's hard for people who place so much value on technology and so little value on human capital, frankly.
Yes.
That to imagine that a well-trained opponent with reasonably good technology can do a lot of damage against someone who's not all that well-trained, despite hurling great quantities of explosives day and night on top of someone. So I think that's where we are right now. And it's going to be a tough fight.
Can Israel make good on its objectives stated by Naftali Bennett or whether it was Yoav Gallant or Netanyahu himself, that they're going to take out the leadership of Iran and that they're going to take out their nuclear program? Can they do that?
Well, I think it's going to be very difficult. So I'm not going to say they can't do it. I think it's probably unlikely that they will have as much success as they're anticipating. But remember, they also have us. And I think they're betting very heavily on us backstopping them. And remember that the things that you're describing happen against the backdrop of problems in Gaza, problems on the West Bank, problems in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, as well as what's going on in southern Lebanon. We know that thousands of additional, let us put it this way, Shiite fighters from Iraq, southern Arabia, Syria have also joined Hezbollah in this fight. So Hezbollah has actually been reinforced. How much, how effective is that? I don't know, but that's not inconsequential. Now, here's something else. Remember that they're also betting that we will continue to bribe the leadership in Arabia, in the Emirates, in Egypt and Jordan, because literally that's what we do. We have package deals that are offered involving billions of dollars that these various regimes desperately need to stay in power in order to feed their populations, pacify their populations, improve their infrastructure. What we don't know is how much longer that will work, because the populations are increasingly saying, we don't give a damn about that. And they're seeing the people that are leading their countries in the worst possible light. In other words, they conform to this ugly picture that's painted in the Quran of unworthy leaders, unworthy monarchs, unworthy sheikhs and emirs. So I have a feeling that a tipping point is coming. And Hezbollah is right now viewed in much of the Arab world and in the Muslim world in general as a heroic force, just as Hamas, simply by surviving and continuing to fight back, has become celebrated. How much longer does that go on before finally you do get Iran to step up 100%? And then there is always in the background Turkey. And the Turkish foreign minister has spoken about their unwillingness to stay out of the fight if this results in the destruction of Lebanon. And I think it's a fair argument right now that Lebanon is being destroyed.
Let's assume that Israel does some version of what they said, whether tonight, the next night, somewhere soon. Then the next question is, what is Iran's likely counterstrike to that? Because it sounds like, listening to their president and their minister of defense last night, that they've already calculated what they're going to do next. But before I do, I want to show you something from John Bolton. But here's what he's saying that we ought to do, which sounds like he got his talking points from Naftali Bennett.
This time, I do think there will be a very substantial response, whether it's against the Iranian Revolutionary Guard bases and headquarters, whether it's against their oil infrastructure on the Gulf, whether it's against the nuclear program. I don't know. I think any of those would be targets that would be perfectly legitimate for Israel to go after. And I think this time this is a demonstration for everybody, not just for the terrorist groups, but for Iran itself. They may not fear the United States. They do fear Israel, and they'll fear it more after this Israeli response.
So what do you think does happen next?
Well, I think, first of all, that what John Bolton described is precisely what the Israelis will do. And I don't think the Iranians will be surprised by it. I think they're prepared for it. And I think the same thing is true for Hezbollah, just as we've seen Hezbollah come to life rather dramatically and inflict heavy losses on advancing Israeli forces despite the pulverizing bombings and air attacks. You'll see the Iranians come back as well. The question is beyond the initial stage of destroy Iranian oil facilities, attack the Iranian government, its leadership, the decapitation idea, and then, of course, the nuclear facilities. What then? And I think what you've got to take into consideration is the possibility, very high probability, I think, that the entire region will explode. Because again, the populations from Libya all the way to the border with Pakistan are all enraged. The entire Islamic world is enraged. People are pouring in to help and support and assist. But more important, the Russians and the Chinese, I would say even the Indians, although I don't see any evidence that they would engage directly. But everybody, the people that you referred to before as BRICS, which is a growing structure, the populations in those countries are all aligning against Israel and ultimately us. And this is why I've always wondered, once this really gets underway and the Israelis begin to take very serious losses simply because of overwhelming numbers, how much can we do to rescue Israel at that point? And then again, the question is, where do we go on the nuclear level? Because the use of a nuclear weapon by the Israelis would just do much more than turn them into a pariah in the world. It would also affect us, because no one has used that weapon in action since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So all I can say is John Bolton is correct in what he says is going to happen next. What happens beyond that will depend on the other factors that we've been discussing.
I'm going to show you a clip here from Jake Sullivan, something that he was asked, and his choice of words here is interesting and possibly troubling, and I wonder how you interpret this. Watch this.
In April, after Iran struck Israel, the U.S. issued a number of sanctions as a consequence. This morning, the president said there would be severe consequences if Iran carried out this attack. What are those consequences, and are they more severe than sanctions?
Totally legitimate question, and that answer will come based on the conversations and consultations we have with our Israeli counterparts. It's too soon for me to stand before you today and give you an answer. What I can tell you is this. We are proud of the actions that we've taken alongside Israel to protect and defend Israel. We have made clear that there will be consequences, severe consequences for this attack, and we will work with Israel to make that the case.
So there will be severe consequences. We will work with Israel. That sounds like you're talking about joining in, not just giving them some more missiles. How do you read that?
Well, we're already involved. This is what people don't understand. We continue to deploy more and more forces to the region, but we're already involved. We have aircraft flying electronic intelligence missions. We're pinpointing targets, lasing targets for them. The only thing we haven't done is launch 1,000 fighter jets in support of them, and also launch the bombers that have already been pre-positioned in places like Diego Garcia to bomb for them. I think all of that is planned, and I suspect all of that will happen. And I think that the question is, does everyone in the world then suddenly bow down and beg forgiveness? I don't think so. I think the opposite is the case. I think we will see the wheels turn in directions that we wish would not move, and that is the world against us and Israel.
Now here's an additional question to that. It's one thing about just whether we do it and what the battlefield conditions would be like, but if the war in Russia, between Russia and Ukraine, is any indication of what modern warfare is like, this is not something that's going to be like Desert Storm. It was over in 100 hours, or even the 2003 Operation Iraqi Freedom, which was about a month of ground combat, and then the war's over. This is something that would be a sustained combat. But can America engage in sustained combat? Just consider in the last 7 days, just within the last 7 days, the U.S. has given the largest ever arms and weapons package to Taiwan in $567 million for Taiwan. Then $8 billion for Zelensky and Ukraine, and then $8.7 billion additional. This is new on top of what's already been given to Israel for its here. And we've already seen that we're short on interceptor missiles to give to Ukraine. Jake Sullivan admitted about 2 weeks ago that he's scraping them from everywhere else in the world that we've offered them so that we can have enough for there. And that's without us using anything. Do we have the capacity to sustain combat?
My short answer is probably not. Not if you have the Russians and the Chinese directly engage in support and potentially as co-belligerents. And that certainly is true if you add the Turks to the equation. So I would say no. But again, I'm sure that every conceivable effort imaginable is underway with regard to bribing people to stay out with any number of different economic and financial benefits and packages. So I think that's underway. Will that work? And that's the real question. And I think as it becomes clear that what John Bolton predicts is happening, it will be harder for those countries' leaders who have historically simply taken the bribe and written off the issue to do so. You know, to some extent, you might compare the beginning of this catastrophe to the outbreak of the 30 Years' War. You know, the 30 Years' War begins at roughly 1618 and runs until 1648. It's not one long continuous war, it's a series, because not everyone becomes engaged immediately. It takes time for the various belligerents to make the decision to intervene, to organize themselves, and then fight. So I think you're in a similar situation right now where there are a number of people that are watching this that think they're going to have to fight. They don't want to, but they're increasingly convinced they'll have to. And it depends on our actions. And our actions, I think, as Jake Sullivan has made very clear, are continued unconditional support for whatever Mr. Netanyahu wants to do. And certainly John Bolton has given you a good snapshot of what they want to do to Iran. And I've tried to broaden that by saying what are the implications for the entire region and the Muslims that live in it. You put it all together, and I think that's going to have an enormous impact globally, not just regionally. And it's not going to help us or Israel in the long run in any way.
Do you see Biden having any possibility of telling Israel don't hit the nuclear sites or the make it proportional, or do you think that they're going to do whatever they want?
There's no evidence, contrary to whatever is claimed, that the administration has presented any obstacles to the Israelis in the course of executing whatever the Israelis want to execute. So I think that's ludicrous. Amos Hochstein and McGurk have both solidly represented and pushed Israeli interests at every turn. So I just think that's nonsense. We're 100% on board. Now, I'm not saying the American people are. I don't think the American people are aware that we are almost on autopilot right now in terms of flying into the storm that looks like a regional and then global conflict. No, I don't think Americans are remotely aware of it. And there's certainly no interest in the mainstream media or in Washington, as far as I can tell, to alert anybody to the ramifications of these actions. On the contrary, I think they believe that they're going to be able to pulverize everybody into submission. And if the Israelis can't do it on their own, we'll help them. And ultimately, everyone will be beaten into submission. I really believe that. I don't see any evidence for the rest of that. Now, just to break away for a second, in Tehran, there was a significant debate behind the scenes between what I would call the traditional hardliners and this new government, which has taken a decidedly moderate position vis-a-vis Israel and the United States. The new government won the argument, and that's why the strike was, in my judgment, strategically ineffective. Now, what happens next, especially if the Israelis do exactly what John Bolton has described, and I think they will, then the gloves will come off completely. And the Iranians will have no reservations or compunction about doing anything. And they will have a lot of support. And again, this is where the regional explosion is headed, and that explosion has global implications. No one is looking at that because people in Washington have this view that this is really 1991 and that we can pretty much do whatever we want. And our close friend Israel can do whatever it wants, and we'll back them all the way. I think that's really where people are, and there's nothing else to be said about it. You and I, all the rest of us, we're going to be bystanders at this disaster as it